Good evening, everyone. I'm Sukhendu Das, speaking on behalf of Center for Research in Post-Humanities, Bakura University. It's my pleasure and an honor to introduce our distinguished speaker, Dr. Hannah Simpson. Dr. Simpson is lecturer in theatre and performance at the University of Edinburgh. She is the author of Samuel Beckett and the Theatre of Witness, Pen in Post-War Francophone Drama, Oxford University Press, 2022, and Samuel Beckett and Disability Performance, Palgrave Macmillan, 2022, and which is the winner of the Theatre and Performance Research Association David Bradby Monograph Prize in 2023. And I would like to congratulate Dr. Simpson for this prestigious award. This award is mainly given for research excellence. She has also published in journals, including the Journal of Beckett Studies, Samuel Beckett Today, 20th Century Literature, Theatre Topics, New Theatre Quarterly, and the Journal of Modern Literature, and the Journal of Feminist Scholarship and Comparative Drama. She works primarily on the representation of the human body on stage and the politicized representations of the body more generally. And her current project explores the forgotten stage plays of modernist novelists. Now I would request our Honorable Registrar, Dr. Saurabh Datto, to share his views and inaugurate this event. Sir, the entire platform is now yours.
Yeah. Thank you, my dear colleague, Sukhendu Das, Department of English, Bakura University, for nice introduction of Dr. Hannah Simpson. It's really a great privilege for all of us that in this fantastic occasion on this day, 27th of October 2023, we have got among us in virtual mode Dr. Hannah Simpson in this series of international web lectures by Center for Research in Post-Humanities on Beckett and the Post-Human. It's a great opportunity for all of us. I want to congratulate my beloved colleague, Sukhendu Das, for organizing such an event. I came to know that he is the coordinator of this entire series. And obviously, I want to add that for this Center for Research in Post-Humanities, which we can term it as CRP, for CRP, there are joint coordinators. One is this Mr. Sukhendu Das, and he is accompanied by Dr. Shubhadeep Pal, who is also the assistant professor in Department of English, Bakura University. Now, Dr. Hannah Simpson, as my beloved colleague introduced her, she is a lecturer in drama and performance, University of Edinburgh. So definitely for our university, Bakura University, a comparatively new university, a university only 10 years of age, which is a state-aided university in the province of West Bengal in the country of India. It's a great opportunity that may not be in the face-to-face platform, but in virtual platform, we have got one personality, one expert, one research person like Dr. Hannah Simpson. Definitely, it would be a thrilling experience for all the participants of this event. And definitely, as the entire event is in the process of getting recorded, definitely the recorded version will reach to a lot of other participants who are not present at this very moment. So this organization of International Web Lecture Series by this Center for Research in Post-Humanities on Beckett and the Post-Human, it's a great initiative, to be very frank. It's a great initiative. And I can remember, not even probably 1 month ago, we had one such lecture series. I was also present there for such type of introductory speech for a couple of minutes. So today is once more. So for the second time in 1 month, we have gathered here for such an event. So well done, my beloved colleague. Please go on. Please go ahead. And I don't have the sufficient stock of words to express my gratefulness to Dr. Hannah Simpson, who has just agreed to deliver the speech and who has agreed the request of my colleague to deliver her speech. So it's going to be a tremendous opportunity. And before I finish, I will say that Bakuro University, as per its tradition, for last 9 to 10 years, have been trying its very best to enrich in every field. I can say it's a university offering post-graduation courses in 13, 14 domains or subjects rather. And not only that, it's an affiliating university. So being an affiliating university, under this university, there are several colleges, mainly in the district of Bakura. Around 20 to 24 colleges are there. All colleges are either government or government aided. And along with those colleges, a couple of private colleges or self-sponsored or self-financing colleges are also there. So in this way, Bakura University is having a very tremendous journey, and people like Dr. Hannah Simpson with tremendous international exposure definitely always enrich us to go further with this type of zeal. So let us hope that it would be a fantastic seminar. It would be a great learning experience for all the participants. So I wish my very best. And again, before I finish, on behalf of Bakuro University, I say namaskar to Dr. Hannah Simpson. And again, I'm expressing my gratefulness to her, because she has agreed to deliver her speech. The Honorable Vice Chancellor of our university, Professor Gautam Buddha Shural, due to some extreme emergency, he could not avail himself, and he has given me the permission to inaugurate this event on behalf of him and on behalf of the entire university. That is what was told by the beloved colleague. Now, I'm also telling that Professor Gautam Buddha Shural, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, he has wished his very best for this event. Thank you very much. So thank you. Over to my beloved colleague Sukhendu Das. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Registrar Sir, for your warm introduction, this warm welcome speech. And I must say that our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Gautam Buddha Shural Sir, and our Dean, Professor Jayanta Kumar Shah, could not join us today for some for their busy schedules. So, and they have sent their best wishes. Dr. Simpson will be speaking on disability and interdependency, resisting enlightened humanism in waiting for Godot. Now I again welcome Dr. Hannah Simpson, I hand over the inter-virtual platform to her. Dr. Simpson, you are most welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for hosting me today, particularly, of course, to Sukhendu for all his work in organising this seminar series. It's a real honour to be able to speak with you all. And if you can just bear with me for one moment, I will share my slides for today. Wonderful. I hope you can all see my slides but still hear me. Do give me a shout if there are any problems. I'm going to aim to speak for about 45 minutes today, to give a bit of space at the end if there are any questions, or simply to hear your own thoughts and comments. I'd be fascinated to know how this work might accord with your own thinking, your own work. So the paper I'm going to present today is a development of some of the thinking from my most recent monograph, Samuel Beckett and Disability Performance, which looks at disability-led performances of Beckett's plays. That is stage productions in which one or more disabled actors perform, regardless of whether or not their roles are explicitly described as disabled in the original script. The analysis in the book is paired with interviews with the practitioners involved in these productions, and I'll be quoting from some of those interviews today. And the book as a whole explores this question: what does a performance that translates a Beckett script in explicitly disabled terms do to our understanding of that playtext and of how Beckett is thinking about human bodies across his work as a whole? And the argument that runs across the book is that in many cases, these productions illuminate really crucial lines of corporeal, social, and ontological thought that are already present in the original scripts. These are not elements that are added by disabled artists, but uncovered by them as important features of the text that have been there all along, as Kirsty Johnson describes much disability-led performance of modern drama more generally. So these disability-led productions reveal or help us see how Beckett's writing really compulsively interrogates alternative embodiments, unexpected forms of agency, and the extraordinary social interdependency of the human body. So today I'll be looking at one case study, the 2018 production of Waiting for Godot by Culture Device Theatre Company at Hackney Showrooms in London, which was performed by a cast of professional actors with Down syndrome. And I'll be examining how this production emphasised how the original Waiting for Godot playtext challenges Enlightenment's ideas of the human, and particularly Enlightenment humanist ideas of autonomy, independence, and gradations of intelligence as defining features of who or what we might recognise as human. So I think it's useful here first to briefly review what humanism, and specifically Enlightenment-inflected humanism, idealises as the defining features of the human. Enlightenment humanism and many strands of modern liberal humanism is built in part on the vaunting of man as a rational being. We are capable of and responsible for exercising our own individual moral autonomy, our own sovereign faculty of intellectual and moral freedom, our own critical and independent thought and action. Or, as Paul Sheehan neatly puts it, philosophically, humanism is that discourse of the modern subject derived from the Cartesian tradition of reason, logic, cognition, reflexivity, and its Kantian moral affiliates of responsibility, duty, respect, self-sovereignty, agency. In this tradition, a reasoning being is also a moral being. Implicit in humanism is the idea of autonomy and mastery, that man has dominion over himself and the world. And Enlightenment-inflected humanism is also built on the ideal of progression and perfectibility, of course, the belief that humankind can and should strive for greater and greater improvement. This belief that as individuals, we have the capacity and the responsibility to improve ourselves, and that as a whole, human existence can and is and should be improving steadily across history. So we see this focus on rationality, independence, autonomy, and the drive towards the perfectibility of humankind. And it's probably immediately obvious that this is not a vision that Beckett replicates in his work, where focus is primarily on non-mastery and non-perfectibility. There's been a lot of great work done already on Beckett's resistance to humanist ideals, this word human that we only use in times of huge slaughter, as he puts it in La Peinture de Von Velde, and I'm not going to rehearse it all here to a room full of specialists. But I am particularly interested in how Beckett's resistance to humanist ideals is tied into his interrogation of, or obsession with, the frailty and fallibility of the human body, and his reworking of the values of independence versus interdependence. Because Beckett's plays suggest that this humanist ideal is quite simply not how we work, that the defining characteristics of humankind as we know it are not autonomy, independence, rationality, and perfectibility, but rather interdependency, mental and bodily fallibility, and contingency. And I argue that there's a deeply ethical component to Beckett's resistance here, because these humanist ideals of progress and autonomy and perfectibility very quickly shade into darker exclusionary and indeed eugenic ideas around the body and the body-mind. If humanists define the human, personhood itself, as being grounded in independence, autonomy, perfectibility, then what happens to those of us who do not or cannot fulfill those criteria, whose lives are not determined by independence, rational thought, easily recognised agency? What is our status then in relation to the human? And when Beckett writes Waiting for Godot across 1948 and 1949, he has, of course, just lived through one of the most extreme historical examples of the darker end point of this humanist logic, the Nazi Holocaust, that saw the mass murder of disabled individuals long before the Nazis turned their sights on other racial, ethnic, and religious groups. It was on disabled citizens that the Nazi movement practiced and honed its extermination practices, bolstered by an explicitly eugenicist logic. Axiom T4, or Operation T4, was the systematised mass extermination of individuals with physical and mental impairments and supposedly hereditary illnesses and genetic defects, carried out with the stated aim of improving the Aryan race and reducing social care costs. Beginning in May 1936, the euphemistically named Committee for the Scientific Treatment of Severe Genetically Determined Illnesses was tasked with the murder of mentally and physically disabled children under the age of 3 years old. Once extermination methods had been refined, from early deaths via starvation and exposure to the first use of the infamous Nazi gas chambers, this age limit was steadily increased to eventually include adults. And it's estimated that the Nazi regime thus systematically massacred around 300,000 disabled individuals by 1945. And again, there's plenty of scholarship on Beckett's knowledge of and distaste for the Nazi regime and Holocaust extermination, which I won't rehearse in detail here, although I will give credit to William Davies' book, Samuel Beckett and the Second World War, for its really excellent chapter on Beckett's sceptical post-war critique of humanist ideology. But I do think it's worth calling attention to this historical context in which certain human beings were defined as less human than others on the basis of their intellectual capabilities, their physical interdependency, and their perceived threat to the perfectibility of the race, when we're thinking about Beckett's own mid-century post-humanist or even anti-humanist thought. As Anna McMullen puts it, Beckett's work repeatedly provides a radical dismantling of the liberal humanist model of embodiment, exposing the myths of rationality and self-sovereignty. In a world of perfectible bodies, Beckett's work insists on the reality of mortality and the limits of embodied life, but does not forge from that a tragic vision, but rather a reimagining of embodiment built on the condition of need, vulnerability, and mortality. Now, Anna isn't talking specifically about disability here, but I think the overlap is clear. Beckett's world is not one that promotes the healthy, autonomous, rational human being as an ideal or even as a norm. Beckett's plays offer us no example of any ideally functioning human body. From motility issues and missing limbs to atypical speech patterns and memory problems, no Beckettian character inhabits a perfectly functioning human body or body-mind. And the Beckettian pseudo-couple gives us repeated models of interdependency rather than independence as the normal state of existence in Beckett's world. This is the model his work offers of what it is to be human, in a very explicitly anti- or post-humanist shift. So where do we see Beckett's resistance to humanist ideology and its dark begettings, and how does disability performance highlight these elements in his work? Here's where I'd like to turn to Waiting for Godot and the culture device production to explore this in more detail. In the summer of 2018, Hackney Showroom in London joined forces with the performance company Culture Device to produce an abridged multimedia staging of Waiting for Godot, performed by a cast of professional actors with Down syndrome. Co-directors Sam Curtis-Lindsay and Daniel Weiss, who do not have Down syndrome, worked with, in order on your screen here, Tommy Jessup as Vladimir, Otto Baxter as Estragon, the very aptly named Richard Beckett as Lucky, and Sam Barnard as Pozzo in a public performance of the play. My culture device very specifically did not claim to have uncovered either Down syndrome specifically or developmental disability more broadly as a hidden theme of Beckett's playtext. Curtis-Lindsay emphasises, I wasn't looking at the play going, how does this relate to actors with Down syndrome? I wasn't thinking, like, what does this mean? I just felt like in some way it chimed with the experience, the potential of these artists. Nevertheless, there are several elements in the play script that introduce a certain, and I think very generative, discomfort for disability-led engagement. For example, we find an array of derogatory terms denoting intellectual impairment casually employed, but rendered startlingly unsettling when articulated by and aimed at actors with Down syndrome. Imbecile, cretin, half-wit, moron, weak in the head. Now, the term cretin has been in use since at least the late 18th century to denote intellectual disability, and moron and imbecile have a still more discomforting history. In 1911, US psychologist Henry H. Goddard took this broad category of the feeble-minded, as individuals with intellectual disabilities were then collectively termed, and he introduced these gradations. He introduced the term moron for an IQ range of 50 to 70, imbecile for the range 26 to 50, and idiot for the range 0 to 25. All individuals falling into the category of moron and below, according to Goddard's eugenicist model of thought, should be removed from society by institutionalization and reproductive sterilizations. Goddard's nomenclature remained in standard use in Anglophone society throughout the 20th century, and these terms were only abolished from medical and legal usage by the Mental Health Act of 1959, that is subsequent to the publication of Waiting for Godot in 1953. And of course, this valuing or devaluing of human life, depending on levels of intellectual capability and the attendant capacity for rationality and autonomy, is a very direct line of inheritance from humanist vaunting of precisely these traits as a defining feature of the human. It's this ideology of less intelligent as less human that allows this slippage into less worthy of life. And that is, of course, if we're assuming that IQ does equate to intelligence in any straightforward way, which I think we are probably all sceptical of. We might think here also of the idea of the sin of being born and Vladimir's insult abortion that we find in Waiting for Godot, and its distinct resonance for disabled practitioners and spectators. Suppose we repented. Repented what? We wouldn't have to go into the details. Our being born? Vladimir breaks into a hearty laugh, which he immediately stifles. Estragon's idea of the sin of being born is a concept that appears across Beckett's work, borrowed from Spanish playwright Pedro Calderón de la Barca, German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, and English author Robert Burton. The phrase, and the insult abortion, acquires new weight in the culture device production, again in this context in which the legacy of humanist ideology has led to the elimination of those with developmental or intellectual disabilities being deemed less worthy of life. Advances in genetic research and prenatal screening frequently result in the discarding of embryos and the abortion of fetuses diagnosed with chromosome 21 trisomy, the chromosomal marker of Down syndrome, and it's estimated that more fetuses diagnosed with Down syndrome in utero are aborted than are carried to term. So the idea of the sin of being born and the insult abortion echo particularly hauntingly in the mouth of an actor with Down syndrome, as do the continued references throughout the play to the selective destruction of life. Of creatures like Lucky, Pozzo declares the best thing would be to kill them, the best thing would be to kill me, Estragon repeats shortly after, like billions of others. Now, the fact that Estragon and Vladimir are hurling these terms, moron, imbecile, abortion, as insults, might seem to support an argument that Beckett's work is here deeply imbricated in or complicit in this same humanist-inflected valuation of individuals based on their intellectual abilities. But I would argue that Waiting for Godot, in fact, mocks precisely this type of humanist-inflected hierarchizing. And it does so most explicitly through the character of Pozzo, who categorizes himself as innately superior to abject creatures such as Lucky, and indeed to men such as Vladimir and Estragon. Initially delighted to meet fellow, quote, human beings, he will shortly thereafter retract his sympathies on the basis of their imperfect likeness to him. You are human beings, nonetheless, as far as one can see, of the same species as myself, as the same species as Pozzo. Yes, gentlemen, I cannot go for long without the society of my likes, even when the likeness is an imperfect one. So we're back to this humanist-inflected language of the perfect and the imperfect, the more perfect or the less perfect, and the hierarchical classifications that determine what material treatment bodies thus categorized receive. Worse treatment for those judged to be inferior or defective, according to this ideology. If this concept of the perfectible, or the more or less perfect, is an inheritance from Enlightenment humanist thinking, it's one that continues to have a particularly pronounced impact on disabled individuals, both their assigned social value and, again, the material treatment they receive. Echoing Pozzo's language of perfect and imperfect examples of his own species, and returning us to this sin of being born in relation to prenatal genetic screening, disability scholar Leonard J. Davis criticises the medicalised concept of the correct or real genome as being one without errors or mistakes, the Platonic human genome sequenced in the right order without mistakes. And he points out that this concept is based on a pre-postmodern definition of the human subject as whole, complete, perfect, self-sustaining, a concept that reduces disabilities to defects which mar, quote, an otherwise perfect and whole human subject. And Beckett's writing consistently undermines this systematising of the human body as a potentially perfect or perfectible entity. Neither Waiting for Godot nor any of Beckett's other works suggest any comparable vision of a Platonic and ideally functioning human subject. In fact, Waiting for Godot directly reverses the humanist ideal of the perfectible, the constantly improving human existence, by instead emphasising the shared vulnerability of the human body, our frailty, our fragility, and our inevitable decline. The play's action replicates precisely what Lucky's speech mockingly refers to as how man, in short, that man in brief, in spite of the strides of alimentation and deification, is seen to waste and pine, to shrink and dwindle, the skull to shrink and waste. In Act 2, Pozzo is revealed to be blind and Lucky to be mute, their health dwindling before our eyes. And Pozzo's furious response to Vladimir re-emphasises the inevitability of this process. When, one day, is that not enough for you? One day like any other. One day he went dumb, one day I went blind, one day we'll go deaf, one day we were born, one day we'll die. Here again is the reality of human existence that humanist ideology denies and that Beckett's work constantly reaffirms. We are not perfectible or constantly improving beings. And again, I think Beckett's close historical proximity to the horrors of World War II casts similar doubt over the idea that the human species as a whole might be improving morally or otherwise across the course of history. As disability scholar Tobin Siebers puts it, the briefest look at history reveals that human beings are fragile. The individual whose body is not yet classified as disabled is nevertheless beset by the constant possibility of impairment as they move through the world, the sudden or gradual event that will transmute them from one identity state to another. Echoing the terms of Pozzo's account of how he woke up one day as blind as fortune, Siebers emphasises that able-bodiedness is also an inevitably temporary identity. I know that as a white man, I will not wake up in the morning as a black woman, but I could wake up as a quadriplegic. To borrow another oft-reiterated line from disability activism, we will all become disabled if we are lucky to live long enough. Now, of course, Down syndrome is a congenital rather than an acquired disability. No individual will wake up one day with Down syndrome. But nevertheless, Waiting for Godot's emphasis on disability as an ultimately, if asynchronously shared identity, compellingly resists the independent, autonomous, rational and perfectible identity that is posited by humanist thought. I'd like to shift here into a closer look at the humanist ideal of autonomy and independence and the resistance that Waiting for Godot poses to these ideals. As Michael Davidson observes, persons with disabilities depend on others in ways that challenge post-Enlightenment ideals of autonomy and independence, and it is here that Beckett's work offers an important challenge to ideas of embodied normalcy. Beckett's writing repeatedly rejects the liberal humanist ideology of unmitigated personal autonomy, and instead resituates human existence as built on the condition of need and vulnerability, to return to Anna McMullen's language. Much recent disability theory offers a reworked understanding of interdependency as a fundamental component of human civilization, rather than an exceptional state of failure or lack. So while certain disability devices like wheelchairs, dialysis machines and domestic carers are often conceptualized as indicators of dependency, our ubiquitous human reliance on other prosthetic extensions of the self, such as sight-correcting glasses, weather-resistant clothing, painkillers, Google Maps, or the entire network of agricultural work and food transport are all equally part of a far broader and more universal system of human need and dependency. Following Tobin Siebers, if we use disability as a critical concept that reveals the structure of dependence inherent to all human societies, we might thus more accurately conceptualize ourselves not as a collection of autonomous beings, some of whom will lose their independence, but as a community of dependent, frail bodies that rely on others for survival in various fluid and situational specific ways. And I'll pause here to say that Yoshiki Tajiri, Thomas Twellen and Céline Taubois' scholarship on the prosthetic body in Beckett's work offers another really useful and specifically post-humanist interrogation of how this inherited humanist ideal of the autonomous human figure is actually very blurred by our deeply rooted reliance on medical technology, information technology, cyber networks, etc. We are all post-human now in that sense. If all beings are dependent on others to varying degrees, as recent disability theorising and Waiting for Godot both suggest, then the relative dependency of the disabled individual is simply one instance on this broader spectrum of human need. And the culture device production accentuated the significance of this line of thinking in Waiting for Godot. The play is populated by a long series of pseudo-couples, including Vladimir and Estragon, Pozzo and Lucky, the boy and his offstage brother, the thief saved and the thief damned, Cain and Abel, and even such formal elements as the text's carefully balanced two-act structure, situating dual interdependency as the dominant relational structure in the play. Beckett himself would explicitly reiterate the centrality of the necessarily reciprocal relationship in Waiting for Godot, explaining that Vladimir and Estragon are interdependent, one needs the other, to Jack McGowran in 1964, and telling Peter Woodthorpe, who played Estragon in Peter Hall's 1955 production and questioned Beckett as to the meaning of the play, "It's all symbiosis, Peter, it's symbiosis." Now, there are certainly examples of distressing or disturbing forms of interdependency throughout Waiting for Godot, perhaps most obviously the violence that of the Hegelian master-slave dialectic that shackles Pozzo and Lucky together, and in the emotionally ambivalent dynamics of Vladimir and Estragon's own relationship. But Beckett's use of this somewhat unusual word symbiosis to describe the dynamics of Waiting for Godot also indicates the potential for a more optimistic interpretation of interdependency. This is interdependency as a potentially benevolent component of human relationships, rather than an abject condition to be avoided at all costs. Symbiosis is a biological term referring to the association of two different organisms which live attached to each other and contribute to each other's support, and it's commonly used to denote a relationship that is to the advantage of both parties. And the play's moments of compassion between Vladimir and Estragon provide some of the key enduring instances of tender affect across the play. Vladimir singing a lullaby to Estragon, attempting to help him with his aching feet and his leg wound, Estragon periodically embracing his companion and encouraging continued conversation to stave off boredom, and the unexpected lyricism of Vladimir's meditation on how, with my friend Estragon, at this place until the fall of night, I waited for Godot. Stranded together in mutual dereliction, Vladimir and Estragon attend to each other's needs with more affection than animosity, framing mutual reliance as a potential foundation for meaningful and deeply felt kinship. While not erasing the weight of the couple's abject dependency on the abject Godot, Vladimir and Estragon's symbiotic relationship affirms the disability theorizing of interdependency as a potential source of reciprocal gain, of valuable fellow feeling, rather than a necessarily pitiable condition of lack or a less than human state of being, according to humanist ideology. And this warmer affective quality has characterised several other major productions of the plays. Theatre critic Kenneth Tynan remarked on the moving interdependence between Vladimir and Estragon, which permitted the couple's survival in Peter Hall's 1955 arts theatre production. Soz Eltis records how the essential tenderness of the central relationship and a compassionate sense of mutual human dependency were the core qualities of Hall's 2005 production at the Barbican Theatre. And reviewing Sean Mateus's 2013 production at the Court Theatre in New York, Marilyn Stasio observed, the only thing that keeps Vladimir and Estragon from slipping into the same state of moral anarchy as Pottsville and Lucky is their mutually supportive and mutually dependent friendship. The Culture Device production laid a similar accent on Vladimir and Estragon's reciprocal relationship as one of the structuring lines of the play. Echoing director Alan Schneider's recollection of Beckett's insistence that the characters were to be played as individual personalities operating in a given set of circumstances, they were not to be considered as abstractions or symbols, co-director Sam Curtis Lindsay emphasised the importance of the onstage dynamic between Vladimir and Estragon, given the play's central reliance on the couple's relationship. He says, when we started playing with the relationships and having Jessup and Baxter improvise with each other and just be there together in that space, it was like, of course they hang out with each other all the time and deeply love each other and deeply irritate each other and find each other hilarious but enraging. That relationship feels central to the text, obviously, and it was just a natural given between those two. And in some productions I've seen, I feel like sometimes we forget that relationship and forget that they're meant to be human beings. They're not some sort of abstract idea of a person. Waiting for Godot depicts mutual reliance as the norm in human relationships and a potential foundation for meaningful kinship, in direct contrast to the Enlightenment humanist ideal of autonomy and self-sovereignty as the defining characteristics of the human, and thus the consequent devaluing of interdependency or disability more broadly as an exceptional condition of weakness or inadequacy. In my final section then, I'd like to focus on how this acknowledgement or even celebration of the deeply human state of interdependency also permeated the dynamics of performance and production in the Culture Device Waiting for Godot. As a theatre performance facilitated in part by non-disabled practitioners, both directors, this dialectic between dependency and autonomy was tightly interwoven into the Culture Device production. On one hand, the fact of professional performance accorded the company's actors the opportunity to exercise a very public form of agency, as skilled performers in a play that is extraordinarily reliant on the actor and the skilled actor. And I do want to pause on this point for a moment, even though it might seem to be veering slightly away from my focus on Beckett's post-humanist resistance, because I think it's a really important point to stress when discussing disability-led theatre. This demonstration of agential skill is particularly critical for actors with Down syndrome in a theatre industry that is often even less welcoming to actors with intellectual or developmental disabilities than it is to actors with physical disabilities. Or, as Baxter more succinctly puts it, theatre is very important because you can show what you can do. Acting here becomes a crucial form of action, both political and performative. Jessup emphasises the value of public-facing theatre, reflecting that disability performance can send a powerful message, saying that people with learning disabilities can act, show their talents and how they might feel on stage, and reiterating his own self-directed discipline as a professional actor with Down syndrome, I work hard and it's all worth it. I always like a challenge in life because you can always rise up to a challenge no matter how easy or how hard it is. And in this respect, it's really notable that all the culture device performers I interviewed rejected my questions about the relative difficulty of performing Beckett's work. In an industry, and indeed a wider society, in which the capabilities of individuals with intellectual disabilities are frequently underestimated, the culture device actors' refusal to dwell on the difficulty of performing Beckett's work serves as a careful reiteration of their own professional competence. And this attitude sits in really stark variance to the cult of Beckettian difficulty which currently reigns among modern actors. Patrick Stewart, for example, called performing as Vladimir in Matthias's 2009 production the hardest thing I have ever done. And his co-actor Ian McKellen agreed that it was the most difficult play in the world to perform. Peter Bull, who played Pozzo in Hall's 1955 production, recorded wryly that the rehearsals were the most gruelling that I've ever experienced in all my puff, and that his performance was quickly reduced to a question of survival without having heart failure. By contrast, when I asked Tommy Jessup if he found any element of rehearsing particularly challenging, he answered very readily, "Not really, it was a fun part." And both Baxter and Barnard made similar replies. "Learning lines is far too easy for me," Baxter asserted. And indeed, throughout our interviews, some of which were conducted nearly 2 years after the Hackney showroom performance, Baxter demonstrated this extraordinarily precise memory of the play, quoting his own and other characters' lines along with the choreographed gestures. And Barnard likewise downplayed the script's demands. "I had to learn my lines before we went to rehearsal, but I learned them quite easily, practicing with my dad. I've got a really good memory. It just comes out." The culture device actors' focus on the issue of memorising dialogue is particularly resonant here, with its looping structure and minuscule alterations in near repeated lines of dialogue. Waiting for Godot is a notoriously difficult script to learn by heart. Patrick Stewart admitted, for example, it was hard initially to memorise it, to learn it. Beckett's repetitions, which are almost repetitions but not quite, the change of rhythms, the non sequiturs, the sudden intrusion of a brand new subject out of nowhere. A short-term memory deficit is one cognitive dysfunction sometimes associated with Down syndrome, and consequently actors with Down syndrome can suffer from industry prejudice as to their ability to memorise longer scripts. Weiss and Curtis Lindsay were prepared to work with in-ear prompting and auto-cue technology to help the actors with the script and performance, but both directors stressed that their precautionary measures turned out to be unnecessary for the actors, and no technological prompting tools in fact needed to be used. They learned the text fantastically, Weiss recalls. The culture device actors' resistance to narratives of difficulty in the theatrical undertaking, even as regards Beckett's famously demanding scripts, offers a spirited assertion of their ability to work proficiently within a professional theatre context. Thank you for indulging me there. I'll return more explicitly to my point about interdependency now. So on the other hand, although the professional theatre performance does offer a really valuable space for self-assertive agency, it's not a medium that accords complete self-directed command to the performer. The modern Western stage actor is typically positioned in an interdependent relationship with the other elements of production, cooperating with or even subordinated to the competing demands of the rest of the staging team. This is particularly the case within theatre cultures which privilege the creative influence of the director or the scripted text. And Beckett's own directorial practice is noted for demanding an intense degree of control over individual actors who must typically surrender self-expressive, self-motivated performance on stage in order to follow the precise directional detail of the scripted text. And one of the really damaging legacies of Enlightenment humanist thought, in which autonomy and self-sovereignty are vaunted as crucial human qualities, is that we are particularly bad in the Western world at recognising and valuing forms of work and agency that aren't entirely dependent on fully autonomous, self-reliant action. And again, this has a particular impact on social responses to disabled individuals and disability-led performance. The issue of agency and disability performance is already a contentious one in wider popular opinion, particularly when a cast of disabled actors is headed by a non-disabled director or directors, raising the spectre of earlier freak show displays or other ethically dubious forms of voyeurism. These anxieties are heightened when the actors have learning disabilities and are assumed to lack the capacity to make informed decisions for themselves, as Culture Device know from very personal experience. The Culture Device company also run a very successful drag troupe called Drag Syndrome, and on your screen is Otto Baxter, or Vladimir, or Estragon in his drag persona of Aurora Shebang. The Drag Syndrome troupe regularly faces accusations of exploitation and abuse on social media based on the performers' perceived inability to comprehend or consent to their involvement in the company's work, alongside a pervasive homophobia and anti-drag sentiment. And in the next slide, I'm going to display a selection of the criticism levelled at the company's social media account. And I'm almost sorry to display it, let alone be reading it out loud, but this is the kind of discourse that the company constantly faces. This is horrible. Taking advantage of these sweet adults to support your perversion is awful. Absolutely disgusting exploitation. Medical practitioners and disability activists have warned repeatedly against treating adults with intellectual disabilities with unnecessary or inappropriate levels of protective paternalism, and even a brief selection of these comments demonstrates the recurrent infantilization and even dehumanization of individuals with Down syndrome. And again, further apologies here for the appalling grammar and syntax in these posts. This borders on abuse and pederasty. I know what it's like to deal with people suffering from Down syndrome. They are manipulated incredibly easily, and it's clear they are being used as pawns here. I can't put my finger on why this feels wrong, but it is. Perhaps because sometimes these beautiful souls need assistance in making even small decisions and do simple tasks. This seems like a decision they cannot make themselves. Like a vegan cat, we all know who's making the decision here. In August 2019, Republican politician and venue owner Peter Meyer shut down a planned Drag Syndrome performance in Michigan on the grounds that the involvement of individuals whose ability to act of their own volition is unclear raises serious ethical concerns, and the differently abled are among the most special souls in our community, and I believe they, like children and other vulnerable populations, should be protected. Such repeated assertions of the performers' assumed inability to determine their own professional behaviour bespeaks a widespread social devaluing of the agency and capacity of adults with intellectual or developmental disabilities, a really direct legacy of humanist vaunting of ideals of rationality and self-sovereignty as the defining features of the human, and our consequent difficulty in recognising any more nuanced forms of agency or autonomy. Such anxieties are countered by the enthusiastic volition of the Culture Device performers, very clearly evident in rehearsal and public performance and reiterated in their interviews. And I will say, having been in a rehearsal room with Otto Baxter, you cannot make that man do anything he doesn't want to do. He's an actor, he's a diva, he's the talent, and he knows it. There is no question of consent or comprehension about his involvement in the theatre industry. Undercutting claims of exploitation, Jessup speaks of performing as a chance to be free, and Baxter himself explains, "I'm happiest when I'm filming or performing. I like to get all the attention on me." Both the improvisatory, self-expressive medium of drag performance and the more self-restrained, interdependent discipline of Beckettian performance afforded the Culture Device actors a sense of creative agency, and co-directors Weiss and Curtis Lindsay were attentive to the group's agential competencies. Although specific care mechanisms such as group mealtimes and guardian escorts at the end of rehearsals were in place to support individual needs, the emphasis remained focused on the actors' capabilities as part of the creative team. Weiss emphasised how, as co-director, he drew directly from the performers' own interpretation of the playtext. They understood the text so well, a little bit more than I do, I must say. Their insight was so inspiring speaking as director. Curtis Lindsay speaks frankly about his own effort to remain alert to the actors' creative fluency. "I was just trying to be in the room with these actors and work with them. And that was the challenge, I think, my preconceptions. As much as we like to pretend that we're all incredibly woke, we do have those things that are ingrained in us, whether we like them or not. As for me, I was constantly trying to shed that skin of preconception. When I find myself thinking, oh, this might be too difficult, or can I have a conversation about what this text is about in its true depth now, I would have to then think, yes, absolutely, I should, and I can, and I will. This was a conscious part of the process. So the culture device rehearsal period was a collaborative process, a symbiotic one, to return to Beckett's own language. And it offers an example of what Duško Radoslavovic has termed heterarchical directorship. Heterarchical directorship is based on the organisational concept of the heterarchy, in which constitutive elements are not fixed in any specific hierarchical relationship and can instead combine in various shifting ways depending on the prevailing needs of the moment. And actor Barnard attests to the similarly collective nature of the culture device production, recalling, I really loved the teamwork on Waiting for Godot. The director Sam and the actors all worked really well together. This model of heterarchy is, I would suggest, exactly what we see in Vladimir and Estragon's relationship in Waiting for Godot, and in many of the pseudo-couple relationships across Beckett's later work. And it's also a model that sits in really direct contradiction to Enlightenment-inflected humanist ideology, with its hierarchizing structures of the perfectible and its emphasis on autonomy and self-sovereignty. So even at its broadest levels of production dynamics, the culture device performance of Waiting for Godot was illuminating and emphasising these absolutely key lines of anti-humanist thought that are running through Beckett's original playtext. Now, as I've gestured towards throughout this talk, there's definitely another specifically post-human reading of Beckett's work in relation to its representation of disability that would focus more on the post-human as the increasing integration of human and machine, human and prosthetic technology. And as I say, scholars like Yoshiki Tajiri, Thomas Twellen and Céline Toubois are already doing really fascinating things in that field. But what I've tried to offer today is a reading of how Beckett's representation of the human body is post-human in how it resists Enlightenment and modernist humanist ideals of rationality, self-sovereignty, autonomy and perfectibility as the defining features of what or who we might recognise as human. These are not the beings that populate Beckett's world. And indeed, these forms of valuation or hierarchizing are subject to consistent and awfully darkly comic undercutting throughout Beckett's work. And I've offered Culture Device's disability-led production of Waiting for Godot as a specific mode of performance that really emphasised those elements of thought and affect in the playtext in particular. So I think I'm offering something of a resistance to, or at least a caveating, of Jonathan Bolter's description of Beckett's posthumanism as he reads it in The Unnameable. He says, this position thus defines Beckett's posthumanism, the subject who, in some sense, is beyond recognisably human circumstances. He is reduced in body and may inhabit or merely exist in sites that cannot be located as such. The subject who cannot assert a claim over the discourse which creates him, locates him, defines him in his present circumstances. Beckett's subject is as far from the idea of the humanist subject as possible. His narrators do not create, but are created. His narrators do not speak, but are spoken. His narrators do not live, but are proxies for lives and subjectivities which cannot be located or known. Now, I think this is an excellent reading of The Unnameable and many of Beckett's early isolated and disembodied prose narrators, absolutely. But much of Beckett's drama, and maybe perhaps even some of the later prose, is more interested, I think, in exploring conditions of dependency, non-autonomy, and the non-rational as more simply a way of being, rather than a desperate, pitiful condition. So these works are perhaps more straightforwardly post-humanist or anti-humanist, simply in how they resist humanist ideology as an explanation of what the human is, how we work, how we function. Beckett's work reveals a world in which non-perfectibility and non-mastery are the norm, and forms of interdependency and non-rationality are sometimes the driving force of extraordinary creativity and aesthetic achievement. Thank you.
Just a second. Yes. Am I audible now? Yes. Thank you, Dr. Simpson, for this engaging talk. Uh, Now, I would like to open this session to question and answer. Uh, I would like to request our audience to type their questions in the chat box, or they can ask Hannah directly. Yes. Dr. Simpson, I have a question. May I ask this question? Yes. So, when read through affective lens, it appears that waiting for Godot rather turns out to be a theatrical representation of post-human affects, in the sense that it subverts human sovereignty and disintegrates human beings into nothingness and promotes the idea of entanglement. So, if this is the case, uh, then can I ask this question? Is the play calls for a new cosmic ontology?
Sorry, your last phrase there was, does the play call for a new cosmic ontology? Is that what you said you can do?
Yes, this cosmic ontology.
Cosmic ontology. I fear that the cosmic may be beyond my scope of thinking right now. I don't know. I really like the way that your question is linking this idea of affect and ontology, which I think, and I mean, maybe I'm just missing certain key stuff here, but I think is something that in Beckett's scholarship we haven't been very good at thinking about it with real rigor and in real depth. How does the affect, and particularly of the play texts, actually really inform how we translate or interpret that ontology? I think we've been a bit slow to link those two terms. I really like the way you're sort of drawing that together. And so, I mean, this is one of the reasons that I was really interested in this particular production of Waiting for Godot. You know, you watching it come together and watching the production, it actually really changed my sense of the affect of that play. I personally had always read Waiting for Godot as, you know, an incredibly bleak play, a really, really bleak play. Was quite impatient of interpretations that tried to turn it into, you know, a sort of, I don't know, a resistance or, you know, a comfort or any of these sort of grand optimistic things, which I think was, you know, is partly my own worldview, perhaps, and maybe just, again, the precise dynamics of particular productions that I've seen. And it was watching Jessup and Baxter bring that production together that again, to me, you know, they weren't changing the stage directions, they weren't changing the text, etc. But that production really brought out those really key and I think very tender moments of affect that come about because of that interdependency. And so, you know, it was absolutely, you know, exactly as you're sort of tracing there, as you can do, it was absolutely that shift in how I was thinking about the affect of the play that then pushed me to think about the shift in the ontology, the way that we might think about, you know, the ideology underlining it, certainly these very specific anti-humanist or post-humanist ideas. I'll stop rambling in response to that, but yes, I think that link between affect and ontology is such a generative place for us to look to, you know, particularly in Beckett's work, probably more broadly, but Beckett's work is what I know how to talk about.
Dr. Simpson, is there any question?
Yes, Tahita, I see your comment. I don't think it's really weird. The word symbiosis never struck me as being a particularly useful or remarkable or, yes, a effective one. And actually the way Beckett uses it there really pulls that out. Thank you.
So I think there is no question, and if there is any question, you can directly email to Dr. Simpson, and Dr. Simpson will be happy to answer them. I would request Dr. Bolaram Bolo to take over the platform and give the formal vote of thanks. Bolaram Bolo.
Okay, so am I audible? I think, yeah.
Yes, you are.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I am Bolaram Balo, a faculty of English at the Department of English, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar College, Nadia, West Bengal, India. On behalf of CRP, Center for Research in Post-Humanities, I am here to give the formal vote of thanks. First of all, many thanks to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Hannah Simpson, for enriching and enlightening us by focusing on Beckett's debunking the Enlightenment humanism. And Dr. Hannah's also engaging discussion on Beckett's dealing with disabilities, the cultural production of performances, and how these are all connected to post-human studies and all. So it was truly an enriching session, and it will definitely help us to rethink and reread disability in Beckettian performances. And then I would like to thank to our patron, Professor Gautam Buddha Shural, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Bankura University, and our honorable guest, Dr. Saurabh Datta, Registrar, Bankura University. We are also thankful to the technology for giving us the opportunity to hold this session. And I also we are all thankful to our esteemed audiences who are present here for their engagement and for their support. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, Dr. Simpson. And I forgot to mention one thing. You always have a standing invitation to visit my university. So if you ever visit India in your future, please don't forget to drop an email, and we'll be happy to host you in person to our center.
Definitely.
It's wonderful.
Thank you so much. I'll feel very lucky if I ever manage to. And maybe just a final thank you to you, Shukendu, for all your work in organising this, and really looking forward to the next talks in the series. It's going to be a fantastic series of conversation.